The air tasted like pine and wet earth. James walked, the forest floor soft beneath his worn boots. Beside him, Buddy's golden fur caught the first pale light filtering through the tall trees. The dog moved with easy grace, tail giving a slow, hopeful sweep every few steps. James kept his gaze fixed ahead, seeing nothing. His chest felt tight, a cold weight settled deep inside. Each breath was a small effort. This was the path he had chosen. He clutched the worn wooden grip in his pocket. It felt familiar, solid. The forest grew thicker, the sounds of the road fading behind them. Only the rustle of leaves underfoot and the quiet pant of the dog broke the silence. James noted the angle of the sun, the way the light changed. Old habits died hard. Even now, the part of him that measured distance and calculated direction was awake, but it served a different purpose today. He was finding a place. Far enough away. Buddy paused, sniffing a patch of moss, then trotted to catch up, nudging James's hand with his wet nose. James didn't react. He just kept walking, one foot in front of the other. The trees pressed closer, dark and indifferent. He liked that. No judgment here, just the quiet certainty of the woods. He thought of nothing and everything at once. The faces he couldn't forget. The sounds that still woke him up. It all led him here. The ground began to slope gently upward. This was good. Higher meant less chance of being found. He could feel the familiar ache in his knee, a souvenir from another life. It didn't matter now. Soon none of it would. Buddy trotted slightly ahead, then looked back, a questioning look in his dark eyes. James offered nothing, just a steady pace into the deepening green quiet. The plan felt simple now. Just follow the path to the end. The dust tasted like metal and something sharp. It coated his tongue, his teeth. He saw Mark go down, not a sound from him, just a sudden stillness in the chaos. James had pulled him back, the weight heavy and unresponsive, tried to find a pulse that wasn't there. The scream started later from someone else, but Mark's silence was what stayed. A hole opened up inside him that day. It never really closed. Coming home didn't feel like coming home. The sounds were too loud, the quiet moments too still. He sat in his small apartment, the walls closing in. Sleep offered no escape. He would jolt awake, heart hammering against his ribs, expecting the next blast, the next order. Only silence, or the distant wail of a siren that sounded too much like something else. He stopped answering calls, stopped going out. The world outside felt like a foreign country he didn't have the passport for anymore. The nightmares were the worst. Faces swam in the dark. Accusations echoed in the empty rooms of his mind. Things he had seen, things he had done, things he couldn't unsee. The doctor had given him pills. They made the edges soft, but the center remained hard and cold. They made him feel like a ghost in his own life. He drifted through the days, aimless, numb. The purpose he had lived for was gone. Nothing felt real anymore. He looked at his hands, still capable, still strong, but they felt alien. They could do things that others couldn't or wouldn't. That knowledge was a burden. He walked the streets, invisible. The civilian world moved on, unaware of the war still raging inside him. He tried to connect, tried to talk, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain the taste of dust, the weight of a friend, the cost of survival? It was easier just to be silent, easier to disappear. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and damp concrete. Dogs barked from every kennel, a wall of noise and need. He walked slowly, not really looking for anything, just escaping the quiet of his apartment. Then he saw the golden shape in the corner kennel. He wasn't barking, just watching the other dogs with calm, intelligent eyes. Something about his stillness drew James closer. The dog's name was Buddy. He had been found wandering, thin and matted. When the attendant opened the gate, Buddy didn't leap or bark. He just stood up, gave himself a shake, and walked over to James, sitting politely at his feet. No demanding barks, no frantic tail wags, just a quiet presence. He looked up at James, a gentle, steady gaze that seemed to understand something unspoken. James knelt down. Buddy nudged his hand with his nose, a soft, tentative gesture. James scratched behind his ears. The fur was surprisingly soft. A small, unfamiliar feeling stirred in James's chest. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. more like a tiny spark in the darkness. He stayed there for a long time, just sitting on the concrete floor while the dog leaned against his leg. It was the first time he hadn't felt utterly alone in months. Bringing Buddy home changed the silence in the apartment. It wasn't empty anymore. Buddy followed him from room to room, a silent shadow. He didn't demand much, just proximity. He seemed to sense the bad days, the dark moods. On those nights, Buddy would simply lay his head on James's knee, a warm weight, a quiet anchor. He didn't try to fix anything, he just stayed. He was the only light left. The path faded behind them. James pushed deeper, stepping over fallen logs, ducking under low branches. The canopy grew thicker, filtering the sunlight into shifting patterns on the forest floor. This was it. The place felt remote, untouched. Far from the trails, far from anyone who might wander by, he found a small clearing sheltered by ancient pines. It felt right, isolated. He dropped his backpack onto the soft ground. The weight felt familiar, like a rucksack from another time. He moved with efficiency, setting up a small tarp. The motions were automatic. Years of training kicked in, muscle memory taking over. He didn't think about what he was doing, only the how. Lay out the tarp, secure the corners. He worked silently, deliberately. Each action was a step closer to the end of the line. Buddy watched him, sitting patiently a few feet away. He didn't whine or fuss, just observed with his calm, steady gaze. James unpacked a minimal amount of gear, a small stove, a single meal packet he wouldn't eat. It was all for show, a pretense of camping. The real purpose was tucked away, heavy and cold. He smoothed the ground where he would sit, made sure the area was clear. The air here was different, cooler, stiller. The scent of pine was stronger. He looked up at the dense green ceiling above him. It felt like a roof sealing him in. He felt a strange sense of peace settle over him, not happiness but a profound lack of tension. The weight he carried felt less heavy here. He was almost there, almost done. He sat down on a smooth rock, the forest quiet around him. This was the place he had come to find. He took the small notebook and pen from his pack. The paper was thin, the pen simple. He didn't know who he was writing to. No one really came to mind, maybe just the air, maybe just the trees. He wrote slowly, the words simple, direct, no fancy language, just the plain truth as he saw it. He started with an apology, sorry for the mess, sorry for not being stronger. He wrote about the weight, the kind that didn't show up on scales, the kind that pressed down on your chest until you couldn't breathe right. He wrote about the faces that wouldn't leave him alone, about the sleep that never came, about trying and failing. He didn't try to explain the war, that felt impossible. He just wrote about the aftermath, the broken pieces left behind. He wrote about Buddy, about the quiet comfort the dog brought, how he was the only good thing left, how he wished Buddy could understand. He wished he could tell him thank you for just being there, for not asking questions, for just waiting. He felt a brief sting behind his eyes, but he didn't let the tears fall. Not here, not now. He kept writing, the pen scratching softly on the paper. When he was finished, he read it once. It felt like a stranger's words, empty. He folded the paper neatly. Then he took out the dull metal squares from his pocket, his dog tags. They felt cold against his palm. They represented a life that felt finished, a purpose that was gone. He placed the folded letter and the dog tags inside a plastic baggie. Then he zipped them into a hidden pocket in his backpack. Done. Buddy hadn't settled down, not like he usually did. He paced a small circle near James, his tail low. He whined softly, a low sound in his chest. James ignored him. He sat on the rock, the weight returning now that the writing was finished. The simple act of putting it down felt final. He looked at the item beside him on the ground, cold steel. Buddy pushed his head under James's hand, nudging it insistently. James pulled his hand away. He didn't want the contact. He couldn't bear the warmth, the expectation in the dog's eyes. Buddy whined again, louder this time. He pawed at James's knee. James just looked away towards the dark wall of trees, almost time. The dog stood up, moved a few feet away, then turned back, looking directly at James. His ears were pricked, his body tense. This wasn't his usual calm presence. This was agitation, A deep unease emanated from him. He gave a short, sharp bark, not a playful one but a sound of distress. James felt a flicker of irritation. Not now, not this. Buddy barked again, then moved towards the edge of the clearing, looking back at James. He took a few steps into the trees, stopped, and barked again. Louder, more insistent. He seemed to be trying to pull James's attention away from the clearing, away from the rock, away from the cold steel. James watched him, annoyed but also strangely held by the dog's unusual behavior. Buddy knew something was wrong. He always did. But this felt different. Desperate. He picked up the weapon. It felt heavy and strangely distant in his hands. The metal was cool against his skin. He checked the mechanism out of habit. Clean. Ready. He sat under the large pine tree, the rough bark against his back. The forest was quiet again now. Buddy had stopped his frantic barking for a moment. A strange hush had fallen over the clearing. He closed his eyes for a second, took a slow breath, tried to quiet the noise in his head, the buzzing static of old fears and regrets. This was it, the final step, the release he had longed for, the end of the pain. He raised the object, its weight surprisingly steady in his hands. The world narrowed down to this single point, this single action. He thought of nothing, tried to empty his mind, just the task at hand. The familiar discipline asserted itself one last time: focus, execute. He felt a strange calm wash over him. It wasn't peace but a surrender. He was letting go of the fight, letting go of the pain, letting go of everything. His finger tightened slightly. The end felt very close now. Then a sound, not close but distinct. A sharp, clear bark from deeper in the woods. Buddy, James paused. The sound came again, urgent and short. Not the distressed whine from earlier but a demand, a call. It broke the intense focus of the moment. A sliver of annoyance, then confusion. What was the dog doing? He held his position, the object still in his hands. But the spell was broken. The silence shattered by a dog's insistent voice calling from the trees. The bark ripped through the quiet, sharp, urgent. Not a bark at a squirrel or a bird, something else, something with meaning. It came from the south, deeper into the woods than they had planned to go. James lowered his hand slightly, his grip loosened. The intense focus he had built evaporated like mist in the sun. He listened. Another bark, then another, rapid, rhythmic, like a signal. Buddy wasn't just barking, he was calling. It sounded like the dog was asking for help or telling James to come. The sound was filled with an urgency James had never heard from him before. It pulled at something deep inside him, an instinct honed by years of responding to commands, to alerts. He tilted his head, trying to pinpoint the direction. The barks echoed slightly in the dense woods, making it hard to tell exactly where. But the message was clear. Buddy needed him. The dog who had only ever asked for proximity and quiet presence was now actively demanding his attention, demanding action. He looked at the object in his lap, looked towards the sound of the barks. The pull was strong. It was illogical. His plan was set. This was the end. But the sound of Buddy's frantic barking was a physical force, yanking him back from the edge. It was a sound of life, of immediate need, cutting through the planned silence of death. He didn't think about why. He just knew he had to hear what came next. He had to know why Buddy was barking like that. He placed the object carefully on the ground beside the rock. He stood up, his movements stiff. His legs felt heavy, reluctant, but the sound of Buddy's barking drew him forward. It was a string being pulled, and he was attached. He walked towards the edge of the clearing, towards the direction of the sound. The trees loomed dark and close. He called Buddy's name. "Buddy, hey, Buddy." His voice sounded rough, unused. The barking stopped for a moment. Then it started again, closer now, and accompanied by a low whine. It sounded like the dog was struggling with something, or trying to move something. James pushed aside the low branches, stepping off the cleared path. He followed the sound, navigating through the dense undergrowth. Twigs snapped under his boots. The air grew cooler as he moved deeper into the shade. Buddy's barks became more frequent, sounding desperate now. James picked up his pace. A flicker of concern pierced through the numbness. What had the dog gotten into? Was he hurt? He moved quickly now, the familiar skills of navigation and movement, through rough terrain returning. He estimated distance, adjusted his path. The barking was just ahead. He broke through a thicket of bushes and stopped short. There at the base of a large oak tree was Buddy, and he wasn't alone. The sight was completely unexpected. It wiped away everything else. The dog was pawing gently at something on the ground, something that looked like a human shape. It was a boy, lying still beneath the old oak tree. His clothes were torn, his face pale and smeared with dirt. He looked young, maybe 15 or 16. Buddy was nudging his hand, whining softly, then looking back at James with wide, imploring eyes. The frantic barking had stopped, replaced by this quiet, concerned presence. James stared, shock freezing him in place for a long moment. A hiker, out here, deep in the woods, far from any marked trail. How long had he been here? He knelt quickly beside the boy, forgetting everything else. The cold steel, the letter, the plan all gone from his mind. Only the immediate reality mattered. A young life in danger. He felt for a pulse at the boy's neck. Weak, thready. He checked for breath, shallow, almost undetectable. The boy's skin felt cold to the touch. Too cold. His lips were blue. This wasn't just someone taking a nap. This was serious. Hypothermia, dehydration, maybe more. James's mind raced, assessing the situation. This wasn't his life anymore, but the instincts were still there. Sharp and immediate. Buddy lay down beside the boy, pressing his warm body against the boy's legs, a silent offer of warmth. James looked at the dog, a surge of something he couldn't name rushing through him. Buddy hadn't just found a stray animal or an interesting smell. He had found a person who needed help, right here, right now. The situation demanded immediate action. There was no time for hesitation, no time for anything else. Years of training snapped into focus. James moved with purpose, his hands steady despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. Check the airway first. Is it clear? He gently tilted the boy's head back, listening for any obstruction. Only the faint, struggling sound of breath. Good, not blocked. Next, signs of injury. Head trauma, spinal. He did a quick, methodical scan. Checked the limbs for obvious breaks, the head for bleeding. Nothing immediately apparent. That was a small mercy. The primary issues seemed to be exposure. Hypothermia was the most immediate threat. Get him warm. Get him fluids if possible. But they were deep in the woods. Getting him out was the priority. He checked the boy's backpack left lying nearby. Empty water bottles. A few granola bar wrappers. No extra layers of clothing. The boy was clearly unprepared for the conditions, or something unexpected had happened. He felt the dampness of the boy's clothes, sweat, or had he fallen in water, it didn't matter. He was losing heat fast. He remembered field medicine protocols. Keep him still. Prevent further heat loss. But he had to move him. Leaving him here wasn't an option. He was too far out. There was no signal for help. He had to get him back toward civilization. He looked at the boy again, so young, so vulnerable. Then he looked at Buddy, who was still lying close, a silent, golden guardian. The dog had led him here. Now James had to finish it. He had to get this boy to safety. He shed his own pack, taking out his spare layers. Not much, but it was something. He gently wrapped his extra shirt and a small tarp around the boy, trying to provide some insulation. He knew it wouldn't be enough, but it was better than nothing. The boy was limp, his body cold and unresponsive. Lifting him would be the hard part. His old injuries flared just thinking about it. The torn shoulder, the bad knee. Carrying dead weight through rough terrain was a challenge even when he was at his peak. Now, it felt almost impossible, but the boy needed him. There was no one else. Buddy sat watching, as if understanding the task ahead. He positioned himself, carefully rolling the boy onto his back. The boy was lighter than an adult, but still a significant weight. He adjusted the limp limbs, trying to find a stable way to carry him. He wrapped the boy's arms around his neck, secured the weight as best he could. It wasn't perfect. It would be awkward and painful. He took a deep breath, bracing himself. He pushed up with his legs, gritting his teeth against the protest from his knee. Slowly, he straightened, the boy's weight a heavy burden on his back and shoulders. It sent a jolt of pain through his bad knee. He stumbled slightly, found his balance. Buddy stood up, wagging his tail tentatively, then moved to the front, looking back as if to say, "This way." James nodded, his jaw set. "All right, Buddy, let's go." The long trek back began. Every step was a battle. The weight on his back shifted, pulling at his shoulders. His knees screamed in protest with every incline, every misplaced step. The forest floor seemed to trip him deliberately. Roots and rocks lying hidden under the leaves. He moved slowly, painstakingly, trying not to jar the unconscious boy. Sweat trickled down his face, stinging his eyes. Buddy took the lead, navigating the most direct path. He seemed to know the way back instinctively, moving with purpose. He would pause sometimes, looking back to make sure James was still following, a silent guide through the dense woods. James focused on the dog, on putting one foot in front of the other. "Don't stop. Just keep moving." He stumbled again, catching himself against a tree. The boy groaned softly, a small, hopeful sound. James paused, catching his breath. The boy was still alive. That was all that mattered. Keep him alive, get him out. The physical pain was a distraction, almost welcome in its intensity. It was a different kind of pain than the one that had driven him into the woods. This pain had a purpose. The light was beginning to change, the golden afternoon turning towards the softer hues of dusk. They were losing daylight. He pushed himself harder, ignoring the ache in his muscles, the fire in his knee. The forest seemed endless, a green maze, but Buddy kept moving forward, a steady golden shape ahead. James followed, fueled by a desperate urgency he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about the life on his back and the life leading the way. The trees finally began to thin. The ground became less uneven. James saw it ahead, a faint, almost overgrown path. A ranger trail, rarely used but still a path. Hope surged through him, a hot, unfamiliar feeling. They were getting closer. He pushed through the last line of trees, stumbling onto the narrow trail. He sank to his knees, gently lowering the boy onto the ground beside him. His body was shaking with exhaustion and pain. He leaned against a tree, trying to catch his breath. Buddy lay down beside the boy, resting his head on his paws, his eyes scanning the trail ahead. Minutes later, he heard a sound, the distant hum of an engine. It grew louder. A vehicle appeared around a bend in the trail, a park ranger's truck. The ranger stopped, his eyes widening at the sight of James, the unconscious boy, and the golden retriever. The ranger was out of the truck in an instant. "What happened?" James managed to explain in broken sentences, pointing back into the woods. The ranger checked the boy, his face grim. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, I have a medical emergency. One unconscious male, possible hypothermia and dehydration. Located off Trailhead 7. Need ambulance and SAR backup. And I have a civilian rescuer bringing him in. Looks like he's in rough shape too." James just watched, too tired to move. Help had arrived, fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, different from the forest. He sat on a stiff plastic chair in a quiet corner of the emergency room. EMS had taken the boy away on a stretcher, a flurry of controlled urgency. Doctors and nurses moved efficiently. James answered their questions simply. Found him in the woods, carried him out. They checked his vital signs. Gave him water, then some electrolyte solution. Asked about his knee, his shoulder. He shrugged it off. "It's fine." They seemed to understand veterans didn't always talk much. They left him there to rest, promising an update on the boy when they had one. Buddy lay on the cool tile floor beside him, a solid, comforting presence. His tail gave a slow thud-thud against the floor whenever a nurse walked by and offered a kind word or a scratch behind the ears. The frantic energy that had driven him in the woods was gone, replaced by his usual calm stillness. He seemed to sense the immediate crisis was over. James watched the double doors where they had taken the boy. He had done what he could. The outcome was in someone else's hands now. He felt utterly drained, physically and emotionally, but the crushing weight he had carried into the forest felt lighter now, replaced by the simple exhaustion of effort. Buddy nudged his hand with his nose. James reached down and rested his hand on the dog's warm head. He wasn't alone. A nurse with kind eyes brought him a blanket and a small cup of juice. She sat down in the chair beside him, her movements quiet and unhurried. She asked if he was comfortable, if he needed anything. He just shook his head. Buddy thumped his tail politely. "We found this in your backpack," she said softly, holding up the plastic baggie. The folded letter and the dog tags. James felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had forgotten all about it. He hadn't intended for anyone to ever see it. He just looked at the floor. She held the baggie for a moment, not pushing it towards him. Her voice was gentle when she spoke again. "It takes incredible courage to walk into the dark, but sometimes," she paused, her gaze steady on him, "sometimes you find a light there you didn't expect. Or you are the light for someone else." He didn't respond, couldn't. He just stared at the scuff marks on the tile floor. She didn't press him. She just sat there in the quiet with him and the dog. After a minute she spoke again, her voice a little softer. "The boy's parents are here. He's stable, critical but stable. They want to thank you." She stood up, leaving the baggie on the chair beside him. "Your dog," she added, looking at Buddy, "he's something special, a real hero." She gave Buddy a final pat and walked away, leaving James with the baggie and the impossible weight of her words. They rushed towards him, a blur of relief and raw emotion. The boy's mother reached him first, grasping his hands, her eyes filled with tears. "You saved our son," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. The father stood behind her, his face etched with exhaustion, his hand on James's shoulder. "They said you carried him out from deep in the woods. We don't know how to thank you." They explained. Their son Liam had gone for a day hike, off-trail exploration. He was adventurous, maybe too much so. They had been searching for 2 days, 2 agonizing days with no word, no sign. They had given up hope, and then the call came. Their son was found, by a veteran and his dog. James didn't know what to say. He wasn't a hero, he was just there. In the right place at the wrong time, or the right time, he didn't know anymore. "My dog found him," James said, his voice raspy. He gestured towards Buddy, who had risen and was standing calmly beside James, his tail giving a slow wag as the parents looked at him. "Buddy led me to him." The mother knelt down, burying her face in Buddy's fur, tears streaming down her face. Buddy licked her cheek gently. The father knelt too, running a hand over the dog's back. "Thank you, boy," he murmured. "Thank you." They kept saying it, thank you, to James, to Buddy. James just sat there, letting their gratitude wash over him. It felt strange, unearned. He had gone into the woods to end things, and instead he had helped save a life. The story spread quickly. A missing teenager found in the wilderness, led to safety by a combat veteran and his golden retriever. It was a good story, a story of hope and rescue. Local news picked it up. The headline on the evening news ticker read, "Golden Retriever leads veteran to save lost teen." A reporter called the hospital. James, uncomfortable with the attention, kept his answers short. He gave credit to Buddy. "He found the boy," James said. "He knew something was wrong. He led me there." He spoke about Buddy's calm nature, his loyalty. The story focused on the bond between the man and the dog and how that bond became a lifeline for someone else. They showed pictures of Buddy, his gentle face, his intelligent eyes. People on the street recognized him, recognized James walking him. Strangers would stop them. "Is that the dog, the one on the news?" They would reach out to pet Buddy, offering James quiet words of thanks or just a simple nod of respect. James still felt uncomfortable. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who had lost his way and been pulled back by a dog. But seeing the impact the story had on others, the small spark of hope it seemed to ignite, felt like something. It wasn't the kind of purpose he'd had before, but it was a different kind of connection to the world. A world he had tried to leave. Buddy, oblivious to the fame, just seemed happy to be by James's side, receiving extra ear scratches from admiring strangers. He sat in his quiet apartment. The weight wasn't entirely gone, but it felt different now. Less like a stone crushing him, more like a scar that ached sometimes. He took out the small notebook again. The first letter was still there, stark and bleak. He didn't tear it out. He just turned the page. He started writing again. This time the words came slowly but without the same desperate finality. He wrote about the forest, about the deep green silence, about the bark that had called him back. He wrote about the boy under the tree, the unexpected face of need in the wilderness. He wrote about the long walk out, the pain in his body, the strange clarity in his mind. He wrote about Buddy, about the dog's steady presence, his unwavering loyalty, how he seemed to understand more than any human ever had, how Buddy had been his anchor when he was drifting and his compass when he was lost. He wrote about the way Buddy had led him not just to the boy, but back towards something else, back towards the light. He didn't try to pretend the pain was gone. He wrote about the battles that still raged inside, but he also wrote about the moments of quiet, the feel of Buddy's fur under his hand, the warmth of the sun on his face when they finally emerged from the woods. He wrote about survival, not just his own but the boys', and how sometimes the worst moments lead you to find strength you didn't know you had. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a declaration he was still here, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The woods still called to him, but now the call felt different, less like an escape, more like a destination. He and Buddy were certified now, a therapy team, a search and rescue team specializing in wilderness finds. It had taken time, training, facing down some of the old demons, but Buddy was a natural, calm, focused, tireless, and James found a quiet satisfaction in the work. They walked the trails not to get lost, but to find. They visited hospitals, quiet rooms where people needed a gentle paw, a warm head rested in their lap. Buddy seemed to know instinctively who needed him most. He would just sit or lay his head on a hand, offering silent comfort. James started volunteering at a local veterans outreach center. He didn't talk much about the war. He talked about Buddy, about walking in the woods, about how sometimes the path you think is leading you to the end is really just turning a corner. He spoke plainly, without grand gestures. His story and Buddy's presence seemed to resonate. They were a team, still, always, walking side by side through forests, through hospital corridors, through the quiet struggles of others. James still had hard days. The darkness still lingered at the edges, but now he knew the edge wasn't the end. It was just a place where you could turn around, and he had Buddy always leading the way back. Their steps were steady now, focused, towards finding the lost wherever they might be.